Thank you for coming to the talk today, Feature Flag Driven Development in Reverse. Before I start, I'd just like to do a quick poll. Who here thinks that one of the best parts about being an engineer is adding features and writing code and contributing to code bases? A few? Well, I'm here to tell you you're all wrong. This is the best thing about being an engineer. Removing code. I like nothing more than removing other people's code. I really enjoy that. But in all seriousness, in the industry, there's been a lot of trepidation and caution about removing features. We're not really good at it, with the exception of some companies. You know, a lot of us have worked in places where there's features that no one uses or legacy code bases, and no one wants to touch them. So I want to talk about that a little bit today. I'll talk about how we can use feature flags to really help control that process and improve the mindset around deprecations. And as we do that, I'll talk a little bit about how at Octopus we've instituted a bit of a process around that and talk about some of the experiences we've had and some of the good and bad lessons. So who am I to talk about this? Who's here today? As has already been said, my name's Robert Erez. I'm a principal engineer at Octopus Deploy. We're a sponsor here this week. We've got a table, a booth at ArgoCon. We've got one at the Platform Engineering Day. And through the week, we'll have a booth at the main exhibition hall. So come in and say hello. So Octopus, if you haven't heard of us, we're a deployment tool. We're a product company. And as a product company, we've for a long time avoided deprecating features, right? Because we don't really own the running system. We don't have full control over what's being used or even what versions of the tool people are using. So we've really avoided that. And it's led to a lot of bloat and old code in the system. In the past few years, though, I've started implementing a bit of a process. And really, we've been getting a lot more confident with that whole deprecation process. In fact, I've been doing that so much, I've got a bit of a nickname in the company as the deprecations are. And a bit tongue-in-cheek, one of the engineers in one of my teams actually made a Deprecated by Rob app. Kind of lists all the things we've deprecated over the years, which is a bit tongue-in-cheek. But what's kind of nice is that some other engineers have started adding to that. So it made me quite proud that this process is actually getting used. So why are we so cautious about this? Well, there's a bunch of risks, right, with deprecating features. What if it breaks something? You know, you're talking about removing code that's in the system. What's going to happen if it impacts other features? And what can I do about that? Our customers using it, you know, what do I do? What do I know about the impacts and the likelihood of the impacts of me removing that feature? How quickly can I react? You know, when an incident happens, I want to know that I can react sort of confidently and safely and deal with that in a really sort of controlled manner. And a lot of these problems of deprecations, right, it's really what we're talking about in some ways is legacy code, right? It's parts of the system sometimes that no one wants to touch, no one knows anything about. So when we're talking about deprecating features, it's not just about features that no one's using, it's sometimes about the code itself and kind of helps to build a safer system. But if you think about it, really, the risks of adding and removing features are very similar to the risks we think about when we're talking about adding features. You know, if I'm adding a new feature, what happens if it breaks something that's existing in the system? You know, our customer's going to be using it. Do we keep investing in this feature? What if adding this new feature causes a problem? What can we do about that? How do we react to that? How can we act safely? And as an industry, we've kind of realized that feature toggles is a nice answer to that, right? So what do we do if it breaks something? Well, we can roll it back, right? This is the promise of feature toggles. You can make changes to your system without having to actually deploy a new version of it. Our customers using it. Now, it sounds a bit tangential to feature toggles, but really, in my view, observability and feature toggles are two really core interrelated kind of concepts, very dependent on each other. I like to think of feature toggles without observability to be like cooking in the dark without a smoke alarm. You've kind of got a bit of an idea of what's going on. You're not really sure if it's working well. You're not sure if it's going to end up how you're expecting. And if things go wrong, who knows, because you've got no alarm, apart from maybe if there's fire or something, then you'll see it. So both of these, both adding and removing, we've realized that feature toggles is a good way of solving that. So let's talk about a few of the strategies we've come up with at Octopus and how that's helped us to solve that deprecation problem. So more metaphors. I've got plenty of metaphors. I like to think about deprecation as being like a controlled demolition, right? It's messy. You're going to end up with less than what you started with. But the whole idea of it is that you end up with a nice, clean space to build something new. We've been developing this process and we've iterated on it and exercised it many, many times at Octopus. And so what you start with is if you've got an active feature, right? You've got something that you want to remove. It's maybe causing more issues than the value it provides. Maybe it's got some vulnerabilities that need to be sort of taken out of the system. So the goal for this first stage is really to document what your plan is, right? What's the plan of attack? And so observability is key to that. So again, it sounds unrelated, but really the answer to a lot of these sort of questions is telemetry, 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 right? So the first thing is to understand what we're going to do. So what's the impact? We're making some sort of change to the system. What's going to happen to the code base? Are there any workarounds? So sometimes you might have customers that are still relying on it. What can we tell them? How can they work around the system? How can they migrate if that's what's required? And effort. So what's going to be involved in you as an engineering team actually sort of applying that deprecation? You know, there's going to need to be some investment from an engineering side of things. So at Octopus, typically we go through this process. Anyone can write up a bit of an RFC outlining their plan, and we get a bit of internal buy-in. And so a lot of that will also involve understanding the, like I said, the impacts to customers. So here's one example we had, I think it was a year or two ago now, where we wanted to deprecate F#. So within Octopus, you can do a bunch of scripting tasks, and we provide a bunch of out-of-the-box languages that will do that for you, or at least provide the dependencies. And we wanted to get rid of F#. And so to understand if that was a good idea, we sort of had a look at the stats of usage. And you can see that PowerShell and Bash, you got thousands of users. But F#, 20 users, right? So that's low enough that gave us the confidence that made us start, okay, actually, let's go through with this. It's worth the value. So we know what building we want to destroy. We've got the plans. So next, you're going to start adding your charges, right? Adding your dynamite around the building. So this is what we call the warning phase. So the whole point of this is this is the point you're going to start going through your code base and thinking about where you've got to put those feature toggles in, adding them in. They'll be turned off initially, but this is where you're kind of going through and actually investing in that work. As you're doing that, you're also adding a bunch of warnings to your system. So it might be in-app warnings, it might be newsletters, it might be direct customer comms, if that makes sense. The whole idea is you want to remove as much surprise as possible. And as you're doing this, you want to be also keeping an eye on those metrics, right? Because ideally, if you've got anyone still relying on it, you want to see those usages start going down so that you know that they're responding to those warnings. So here's a tip. Break up your toggles into small granular pieces as much as possible. So that allows you to isolate the bits of code that you can remove and allows you to do it in a much more sort of structured way. So as an example, we were removing bundle tooling. So Octopus bundles up a bunch of CLI tools that are used during a deployment. And as you can imagine, bundling CLI tools in a downloadable, installable app means it very quickly got out of date or had vulnerabilities, or it was kind of this constant case of trying to update things. So we wanted to get rid of bundle tooling. And so initially, I went in with one feature toggle around the whole feature and turned it on. The problem was we started getting complaints from customers for specific CLI tools. So we had to roll the whole thing back. The next step we took, though, was to introduce a lot more smaller, fine-grained toggles around individual CLI tools. That allowed us to roll each one out individually, assess the impact, start removing code while looking at the problem ones and addressing the issues that were coming from that. So we've made our plans, we've laid out the charges. Now for the fun part. This is what we call the soft deprecation. This is where you start blowing things up. Now, I don't have a good metaphor here, unfortunately for you. In construction, it's hard to unblow things up once you've started, which is probably why I'm in engineering and not construction. But the whole idea is you start actually enabling this, right, and start having those effects in the system. The timeframes here aren't particularly important, but the whole idea is you want to have those plans up front to understand what are the stages you're going to go through, right? We typically go 6 months after warning, but for some features that we know are particularly causing us problems, we might speed the whole process up. Other times, if we know there's customers relying on it, particularly big customers, we might take a bit longer. So the numbers aren't particularly important, but just have that in mind when you do that first plan so you can create those really well understood expectations on their part. So we're starting to roll things out, right? And I follow a process a little bit like this, regardless of if I'm deploying a feature for a deprecation or for adding a feature. Rather than rolling out, what magic number do we start rolling out? How do we stage it? What do we do? I like to think about, well, what are the actual questions I'm trying to answer as I'm going through that rollout process, right? So we dog food internally. It's probably no surprise that as a deployment tool, we use Octopus to deploy our own system. But we treat it like an internal customer. So the builds team, they'll raise issues and give us feedback, most of which we ignore because they're a non-paying customer, but they're there. But the whole point of rolling things out first to dog food is to understand, what's going to happen when I ship this thing out. Like we said, we're removing code. Is it just going to blow up immediately? So to get that immediate first bit of information. Then we roll out to a small percentage of users. Now, because this is a deprecation, the chances are that it's actually not going to be used by any of these people or any of these customers you're starting to roll it out to. So what's the question here? What we want to know is this going to impact anything else in the system? So, we've probably got feature toggles around the place that are switching conditionals in different directions. Is that going to have any impact on anyone else? So this first stage is really just about understanding what's it going to do to the system outside of the actual feature. The numbers here, again, don't really matter too much. It could be 10%, it could be 30%. Pick a number. It's more about understanding what are the questions I'm asking as I roll things out. Then I roll out to sort of the broader range. It might be 80%. Sometimes we go straight out to 100%. But the whole goal is to then understand, okay, what's going to happen to those customers that actually were previously relying on it. Sometimes when I'm doing this, I'll actually go in and explicitly find the customers that I know that were sort of using it in the past and turn it on for them. Just have a look at what's going on in their system. And again, that's where observability is so important. And actually, I think there's a talk after this about observability as well in feature toggle, so that's very apt. I'm looking forward to hearing about that. But yeah, the whole point here is to understand what are the impacts to those customers. Then we sort of go out to 100%, roll out to everyone. At that point, really, you're just looking at the metrics to understand, okay, is everything still running smoothly? Has it actually gone out to everyone? And when can I start removing those toggles? Because that's going to be the next important part, right? So here's an example of a rollout that I did a couple of months ago. This was actually the bundle tooling one, I think. I had a specific customer that I knew that was relying on that tool. My assumption was that our cloud systems that we had that tool pre-installed, and so everything would keep working fine. So what I did when I got to that point of the rollout is I had a look at their specific metrics. These are their deployment. This is their deployment frequency. And you can see they've got this sort of cadence for when they perform this action. So I flicked the toggle as soon as I knew it was going to be sort of in the line of execution they were relying on. And maybe you can make out this little spike of failure right in the middle. But I kind of got that immediate feedback, right, of being able to see in the metrics, things have changed. Something's happened because I've flicked that switch. And so what I could do is immediately flick it back off for that customer, take a breath, and have a think about, okay, what's actually going on here? What have I missed? What assumptions were wrong? And this is the nice thing about feature toggles, right? Like, this is the promise that I can make a change, see the problems live, and then rectify that kind of in real time without having to ship code or panic about, how do I quickly stop the flow? What's going on? So what I did in that case, basically step back. The fundamental problem was the cloud agent we were using in testing had a bunch of dependencies that weren't there in prod, but we're able to go back and reassess and make that change and push it out. So I've rolled it out, we've rolled it back. Now what we really want to do this whole time is roll forward. So word of advice is to always try to be brave and keep pushing that toggle out as much as possible. I try to avoid even telling the account managers that you can disable the disable sometimes, just to avoid them sort of asking us to change it for customers. Because what happens is, if you've got a deprecation and you tell people there's a way out, what they'll and they're reliant on it, what they'll do is ask for you to turn it back on, and then they'll go back to whatever task they've got, right? Because for them, deployments is just some side effect of whatever it is they're building and working on day to day. And so it's nothing kind of malicious on their part, but you've kind of solved the problem for them. So what we've done is recently been experimenting with a new process I like to think of as a auto reset trigger. Essentially, we wrap the toggle in another sort of system that the customers themselves can turn back off. So if they have some sort of problem with a feature being deprecated, they can come in, turn it back off, and what they're told in no uncertain terms is that toggle will actually reset back again after 1 week. And so I like to think of it as being like a parent coming into a room with fighting kids. You turn the light on and off, on and off, on and off. The whole point is to get their attention and make them sort of take whatever steps are necessary to actually move away. So toggle switch, this is what it's all been about. This is what we call the hard deprecation phase. And this is about 6 months later, once we've sort of been pretty confident that no one's relying on it. Again, dates aren't particularly important, but at this point we can start actually removing code. So this is the bit everything's been working towards. So at Octopus, we've actually built a feature toggle system directly into the deployment tool, and we're going through some alpha testing now with customers. But again, dog fooding, we use it ourselves in our own system. When we were testing it, we had a feature toggle called the feature toggle, which confused a lot of people for a while. What we do with that system, though, is we actually wrap the toggle itself in another class. And so it's exposed to the engineers in a way that they need to provide a bunch of other sort of metadata around that toggle. So we ask them to provide the team name, so that lets us know kind of which team is responsible for it. It avoids other people going and just removing toggles without knowing what it was actually used for. We had that in one case. Don't need to go into detail, but it started breaking things, surprise, surprise. We also require providing an expiry date. So the whole point of that expiry is we have in the actual CI process a mechanism that reviews the toggles that it's that's in that build, and if there's any toggle that has an expiry sort of prior to today, it'll send a notification to that team. Now, there's no reason it's not an enforced requirement that they have to remove it there and then, but it just serves as a good reminder for them to know that actually they maybe need to go and clean things up. So this is about solving that zombie toggle problem, right? We want to add those checks into your CI so you can kind of get that early feedback, and particularly for us as well, where we have a hosted version, we might have customers on different versions of the app at a given time. So being able to have logs for when things are toggled allow us to also understand, well, has the toggle itself actually rolled out to every customer? Because the last thing we want to do is start removing the toggle from the actual management tool, but have it all still be in the code base, because things would then probably switch back on. So yeah, monitoring, understanding where that toggle is allows you to start cleaning things up. Following this process has introduced a bunch of benefits for the team, I think. Everyone's gotten a lot more comfortable about thinking about deprecating code and removing code. Adds to a lot more of a maintainable code base. Code's getting simpler, and people are thinking about things, I think, in a lot more mature way when they're adding features. They're thinking about the whole life cycle of it. And so I like to think about, we talk about CD as being about continuous delivery all the time, but in reality, that's only scalable so far. You can't keep delivering more and more and more. Sometimes you need to deprecate things as well. So the CD, to me, is also about continuous deprecation. It's kind of a key part of that process. And I've expertly added it to our famous CD. You probably can't tell, but comes out of monitoring there. So in summary, hopefully you found some of these processes useful, and you can sort of bring them back to sort of the teams you work with. Hopefully you can kind of see that feature toggles aren't just about helping us deliver new value faster. It's about retiring old value safely and building that confidence within the team to do it. Feature toggles help us turn feature removal from a risky guess into a reversible, observable process. Thank you.